The honest answer, Sarah, is I don't really know. It is not always the case that every policy that's taken to an election goes through robust internal party processes. They don't always go through shadow cabinet or the shadow expenditure review committee of cabinet. Sometimes, depending on how significant they are, they can just be settled between a shadow minister and the leader's office, for example. So I don't know in that instance, because it wasn't my portfolio area, what process that one went through. But obviously one of the very clear lessons out of this election campaign is our policy processes need to be improved. They need to be much more robust. We need to stress test things much earlier and much more robustly before we release them publicly.
So who is responsible for that, in a sense, policy chaos?
Well, I think we have to take collective responsibility, and it reflects very well on Peter as our leader, that he stood up on election night and took that responsibility personally, but it is a collective responsibility. The entire shadow cabinet, the entire party room, all of us have to bear that responsibility. I think one of the reflections I've had is that after the last election, we prized unity and discipline over all else, and unity and discipline are incredibly important in politics. I wouldn't suggest that otherwise, but it's not more important than thrashing issues out properly, to having the proper debates. And I think this time we need to make sure we have those debates in a respectful way within the confines of the coalition in the Liberal and National parties, but we need to settle those big policy issues early and robustly together.
So the fact that they were coming so late, that's a big part of the problem.
I think some of our policies, had they been out earlier, had they been ready earlier, had they been up for public scrutiny earlier, could have been very well received by the public. I think we could have campaigned on them for longer and they would have earned a lot of support for us. But we released a lot of policies in the campaign in a way in which I think it was hard for many voters to keep up, and our research was showing that some of the big announcements we made, voters were not clear that we had announced them, or were not clear that they were our policies rather than Labor's policies, particularly when you're talking about busy people who have other things in their lives to worry about than elections. They're not tuning into the minute detail, and we need to make sure we give them time to digest and hear our policies.
Should the nuclear policy stay or go?
Well, I think the most important thing with this election result, given how comprehensive it was, is that we be humble and we accept the verdict of the Australian people and listen to them. And that means all of our policies, including the nuclear policy, must be up for review. I'm someone who's personally argued for nuclear on the public record for about 10 years, and I do think it still is part of the solution to the energy problems facing our country. But the form in which we took it to the last election, I think, is going to be very difficult for us to take again to a future election, simply for practical reasons. Our plan was premised on replacing coal-fired power stations as they leave the system with nuclear-powered facilities. Those retirements are going to be happening in the next few years, and undoubtedly other things will happen to those sites. So I think that option is probably not viable anymore, but I think we should keep the door open to nuclear playing a role in the future, because it is still that emissions-free, reliable, proven technology, and I am deeply worried still about our energy transition and whether or not we can complete it successfully.
But weren't the flaws in that policy, I'm going to just say, blindingly obvious to you as someone who understands nuclear energy?
The risks were obvious, and it was a political risk, and I have great admiration for Peter Dutton that he didn't just play it safe in opposition, that he took something that he thought our country needed and he argued for it. He knew full well when we adopted this, we all did, that there was political risk involved, but we believe that it was in the country's national interest. I think leadership demands that you do what you think is in the right, in the interest of the country, even if there are political risks involved.
How much did the embrace of Trumpian ideas and values hurt your campaign?
My view is that the Trump effect was the single largest factor that was outside of our control that impacted our campaign. It had a devastating effect on our polling numbers. We peaked around Inauguration Day and we slid after that, particularly fast after the Zelensky meeting and then again after the tariffs. But that's not to exonerate us of political responsibility there. We could have done more to inoculate ourselves against that, to prepare that, and there were some things that happened in the months in the lead up to the campaign and the campaign itself that exaggerated the similarities between us and Donald Trump. The truth is actually the politics of the centre-right Liberal Party in Australia is quite different to what's happening in the Republican Party in the United States right now, but the government very successfully tied us to them, and it was devastating.
But in terms of what you did, is Peter Dutton responsible for not making that distinction clearer?
I think we're all responsible. I think Peter would accept his share of responsibility. I accept mine. We all have responsibility to do that. Because the truth is, Donald Trump is a very unconventional centre-right conservative politician. Many of the things that he believes in are not consistent with the Liberal Party's values. Trade is a very good example of that, but we also profoundly disagreed with his approach to Ukraine. And we should have anticipated the political risk of being seen to be associated with him earlier and done more to make that clear.
One of the people who did make that association clear was then CLP Senator Justina Price. She's now joined the Liberal Party room. What does that tell us about the direction of the party post the loss?
Jacinta is an extraordinary political talent. She's endured adversity in her life that most of us never even have to contemplate, myself included, and she's emerged from that stronger and better, and she's an incredible communicator. And any centre-right political movement would be excited to welcome Jacinta into their ranks, and I certainly welcome Jacinta in our ranks. I think you'll get to see Jacinta in a different mould in this new parliament, whatever role she takes up in the Liberal Party. I think she'll broaden her interest in other policy areas, and I think she'll make a really big impact and cut through. But
someone who said, let's make Australia great again during that campaign in the midst of the chaos caused by Donald Trump, why is that someone who should have a dominant role in the Liberal Party, maybe even be deputy leader? Why do you want that?
Look, I think that was an unfortunate phrase, but it isn't actually a reflection of Jacinta's worldview. She's not arguing for Trump-style politics. She doesn't believe in Trump-style politics. She believes in traditional centre-right Liberal Party values. In fact, I think she always has found her philosophical home in the Liberal Party, and the traditions and beliefs of the Liberal Party are very close to her heart. And I think you should give her an opportunity and judge her how she performs in the Liberal Party, because I think she's got extraordinary talent. I'm looking forward to seeing what she can do.
And very quickly, Susan Lee or Angus Taylor?
You won't be surprised. I don't want to publicly canvass that. It's the private conversations I'm having with my colleagues. But whoever wins, the Liberal Party must unite behind their leader, resolve these important philosophical and policy issues, and get on with providing Australian people with the alternative government that they deserve, holding this government to account and taking an agenda to the next election that can excite and inspire them to vote Liberal again.